This episode of Get Creative is brought to you by my new service, EnzoGoGo.com. Find the right person for the right job. All right, on with the show. Hello and welcome to the Get Creative podcast, the podcast for creatives by creatives. I'm Evan Schmidt, and my guest today is Enrico Nardini. He's the owner of Drawbridge Games, a tabletop game store in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hey Rico, thanks for coming on the show today and giving some of your day off. Tell the listeners a little bit about you.
So, Evan, I've had an interesting I have a kind of an interesting background. At least I think it's interesting. I started off. I went to college in University of Pittsburgh. My goal was to teach philosophy. I was really into philosophy at the time. I still kind of am. I still definitely keep up with it a little bit and reading and whatnot. And so I went to school for that, but I didn't end up staying with it. I ended up actually moonlighting as a professional wrestler of all things for 7 years. It was great, a wonderful time in my life, and I really had a chance to go for it for a little while. And but I hit some really rocky roads financially, which wrestling will do to you. And so it ended up putting me in a position where I felt like I had to jump to the nearest, safest thing. And so I became a teacher. And though I was good at being a teacher, it was not my passion. And so while I was working as a teacher, I went and I was doing all these gaming things. And gaming had been a through line in my life for such a long period of time. And so I was gaming while I was wrestling. I was always doing these things around the game industry. So I started doing, just for free, as in addition to the hobby aspect of gaming, I was doing all this work, this writing about games, editing work for other people about games, working on people's Kickstarter projects, things like that. And so that's kind of how I got my first into the games industry. And that's where it all that was like where it all began. And that's kind of how I knew it was a passion, because I was doing it in addition to, working my normal quote unquote 9-to-5 job. Though when you're a teacher, it's never 9 to 5.
Well, cool. So what comes to mind with your awesome background of something very important that you've learned?
I think the most important thing that I learned about when I went to start the store is that you kind of just have to do it. It's and I learned about finding, how to find your passion. And I think that the really good indicator, like I was saying previously, I think the best indicator is when you are doing something and you just can't stop doing it. So it's not just, obviously I'm realistic in the sense that I understand that we have to make money to survive, things like that. But when it's something that you are doing and you just can't stop doing it, you care about it that much, that's when you'll know you're in the right place. I feel like that's really, really important. And I think it's something that people would do well. If I could give a piece of advice to people who are, younger than me or whatever, that it takes a long time. I'm almost 40, number one. And number two, it takes a lot of work and personal searching and sacrifice, and no one is going to do it for you. And that's I think the hardest thing. I definitely have down days. I have days when you struggle and everything else. I'm no exception in that regard. And I think you come in with a certain set of strengths and weaknesses. And in my mind, you can't always be the smartest person in the room. I'm sure even Stephen Hawking at times is not the smartest person in the room. In some weird circumstance, I'm sure it's conceivable, and you're not always going to be the prettiest or the best, the most well-spoken, but you can always be the hardest working. You can always work as hard as you can, and that's kind of been my philosophy, and it's served me pretty well at this point. But I will say that the way to make that happen is with some kind of passion, and that's that. I feel like you're never going to hit that point where you're working as hard as you can, and it feels good, without finding first what you really want to dedicate your life to. And I think it's evolving too. That was the passion I had in wrestling that I lost when I left it, and that I've been lucky enough to rekindle and find it again. And I think that is, In that regard, even though wrestling didn't turn out the way I had originally intended it to, what it did allow me, what the thing I can never, thank it enough for, is it did allow me to know what it feels like to throw yourself 100% into something, so that now, when more opportunities arose, I was ready to capitalize on them, and I think that's really, really important. And so I feel like kind of the most important thing is just to be in that position where you're like, oh, here's an opportunity. I'm going to just dive in cannonball style with everything, and we'll see what happens. I feel like that's how you get things done.
Yeah, that's great. So what's been going on at the store lately?
We run a lot of events. That's one of the things about Game Store. Warhammer 8th edition, which is a huge release for Games Workshop, was definitely the newest and latest hotness. But game stores are community hubs. I think that's one of the other things. On a podcast like this, with the title "Get Creative," it's like, oh, it's retail. How creative could it be? And actually, I feel like one of the things when you're working in retail is you really have to find creative ways to engage the community that you're in. Both for your benefit and for them, to get them in the door, but also to offer them that, the things that you can always find a deal. You're always going to be able to go online and find some kind of deal. There's a kind of with online sales especially, there's this perpetual race to the bottom. So if you want to open a retail store and you want to be successful, you need to offer something. You need to put yourself out there and offer an experience. And so we run lots of events. Anything from game demo days to special tournaments to painting demos, things like that. All these different services that are beneficial, to the community, and that's how you kind of ensconce yourself into a position where, you are a necessary component in people's lives in terms of their expression of their hobby. They're the thing that they love to do for fun, the way they blow off steam. And, I feel like that's a way for game stores to be successful these days. It's one of those things where it's like, well, what do you, this is a retail store. What are you offering? And we're not just offering plastic, these awesome plastic toys that they're really fun to play with, and models and paints and things like that. It's not just the product. We're offering an experience.
Nice, and that's very true for any kind of entrepreneur too, and that's how you get those repeat clients and those repeat customers.
Yeah, I say this about games retail. I think that you survive on the everyday, day-to-day sales and things like that, but you thrive on the repeat customers. You thrive on the people who are so passionate about what you're doing and so passionate about the community you've created. They're there every week playing the games. The kind of people who see a deal on, say, like Amazon, and they're like, yeah, but, saving 20% here is not as important as, making sure that this place is still open, because it's where I spend hours and hours of time, and it's where I've met some of my best friends and things like that. Like, that's, it's crazy to say, but that's, and the reason I know that is you might be thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, well, that's crazy. Like, who cares? I'll just buy it, as cheaply as I possibly can. But I have to say, the reason I know that is because I started out, I'm not just the hair club president, I'm also a client. I started out, my passion for gaming started out at local game stores. I owe my good friend and one of my mentors, Jeff Yandora, a great deal of thanks for kind of showing me these are some of the untaught lessons even before I started working in the game industry. This idea of like, wow, I love this store so much that I would see a deal and be like, yeah, but that's something I can buy from Jeff. That's and I think that that's a huge testament to great customer service that he always had, and I try to do now. I'm not going to try to pretend like I've invented something. I just constantly reinvent it. I'm constantly trying to improve it. In that regard, from a creative standpoint, it's more about taking what we know is successful and constantly updating it and making it cooler, making it more enjoyable. And in that regard, like when it comes to like owning a store and things like that, like how do you do it? It's a combination of hard work and luck. I had a lot of good exemplars. I have amazing parents. who are just the hardest working people I know to look up to. My wife is an MBA, and she started her business from nothing. So I saw that you can start from nothing and with enough hard work be successful. So in those regards, like that's the thing. And if there's one thing anybody who's listening to this podcast, I hope they get out of it is that if you have a passion and you're willing to pursue it, there is a way, by hook or by crook, and it might take 10 years, it might take 20 years. It took me 10 years just to get to where I am, and I still feel like I'm nowhere. I'm 2 years into owning the store, a little more than 2 years, and we're successful, and that's awesome. That I'm able to pay my bills and live a relatively comfortable life, with this passion. But it took 10 years to just get to here, and I don't know if I'll ever be in a position to retire or anything silly like that.
Well, that's so good. I love everything you had to say. That was great. So where can people find you?
They can check out the website for the store. That has all the links to all the crazy social media stuff. I mean, it's drawbridgegames.com, all one word. And on there, if you look up at the top right corner, there's hot links to all the, the other social media stuff. Facebook and Twitter, I update fairly regularly. Same thing with Instagram, of course. But I have stuff that, I have a YouTube channel that I do like a funny commercial for Black Friday every year. But that's like a once a year thing. I have a Twitch channel. I did something on once, but it's hard. Oh man, it's hard. I mean, Evan running the podcast, not to turn it around and interview you, but I mean, you know how hard it is to keep up with. There's just so many different platforms now.
You got to be picky
to get your message out, So yeah, but definitely the website, which lists all our events and things like that, and of course, Facebook, Twitter, they're definitely the most ubiquitous social media platforms, at least as far as I'm using.
Yeah, you gotta pick your battles. Well, Enrico, thanks for coming on the show today, getting creative. And before I forget, Happy Father's Day.
Thanks.
2 days ago.
Yeah. No, it's that's a whole nother adventure. I mean, my son's about to turn 6. He's such a huge focus of my life right now. And can I tell you one other thing? I'll tell you one thing about finding your passion and why it's important. And I got to give a shout out. Oh God, I can't remember the guy's name. I'm not a big TED Talk guy. I think a lot of times TED Talks can be over the top and somewhat pretentious. And I'm about to talk about TEDx, which is like, it's like even worse. It's like here's the not the not ready for like primetime broadcasts of TED Talks. But there's a TEDx YouTube video, and it's called How or Why You're Not Going to Have a Great Career. And it of course is quite the opposite. It's kind of an instruction on why it's so important that you pursue your passion. And it totally changed my life. I wish I could remember the guy's name. But if you just Google why you're not gonna have a great career, it's gonna pop up right away. But the basic gist of it was, why it's so important to pursue your passion. And they bring in kids into it because a lot of people, become parents and then they use that as an excuse, like, oh, well, I have to have this much more stable job because I'm a parent now and I have responsibility. And don't get me wrong, I agree with that. You never want to put, your family in a situation of being destitute and stuff like that. But if you're not pursuing your passion, and this is the guy's point, what your kid is going to see is that you're unhappy. You're not living your life to the fullest. And so there's going to come some time when your kid's going to come up to you, and I'm paraphrasing what the guy said, but I think it's excellent, where your kid's going to come up to you and he's going to say, I know what I want to be, and you're like super hoping he's going to say, or she, I want to be a doctor, I'm going to be an engineer, I'm going to be whatever, and they're going to be like, I want to be a stage magician, Or in my case, when I was younger, I want to be a pro wrestler, and someone's going to say what as a parent are you going to say when that kid says that, Are you the kind of parent who's going to say, no, you should go do that, or are you going to be the kind of parent who is going to be hemming and hawing, and what it comes down to is, well, I wanted to do what I was passionate about too, but I didn't because you came along. And I would rather be in the gutter than give my kid that kind of a message, because what a burden to put on them. Like, oh, I played it safe so that you could have a better life. You know, that's terrible example for your child to have to grow up with, and a terrible burden that you know, like, oh, I suffered for you. I mean, don't get me wrong. I revere my parents for the sacrifices they made for me, and I think my son recognizes the sacrifices that I make for him. But you know, they're not just financial. Those are sacrifices of my time and my interest. I show my interest in what he's doing, but I also lead by example. You know, so that if my son comes to me and says, like, I want to be a professional wrestler, I'll be like, go for it. You know, I never made it all the way, but I got to go work in Japan. Like, you know, I was on Japanese television and in magazines. You know, I have some of the best times of my life. You know, it's the same thing with the store. Like, I owned my own shop, you know, that kind of thing. Like, you know, you have to be able to say these kind of things, or you're going to be the kind of parent who's like, oh, I don't know, you know, I don't know, Timmy, I don't know, Sally, like, that's a really hard road. You know, you might want to go play it safe and become, you know, an accountant or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with accountancy. I'm just saying, you know, that's my point, I guess. You know.
Yeah, I'm keeping all of that. That was good. That was so authentic, and yeah.
Yeah, it totally changed my life, man. I watched it the first time, and I'm not the kind of guy who tears up over things or anything like that, but I got to the end of it, and it was one of those things where, like, you know, it put a tear in my eye, like, because it's real. It's one of those things that, you know, I never want my kid to feel like they were a burden to me, or that I didn't try to fulfill my fullest potential because of them, because I want my child, when he gets old enough, to be able to say, you know, Dad, like, these are the things I could do. I could play it safe, whatever, blah, blah. And I'll be able to say, like, look, I want you to do what you want to do. I want you to do the thing that gets you, that, you know, puts a rocket in you and just shoots you off to the moon, like gets you started you know, gets you out of bed in the morning and you're like, I got to go do this. It's super important to me. That's what I want, so.
Very well put. Well, Rico, thanks again. That was a great way to end it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan. I really appreciate being on the show, and I look forward to, you know, maybe we'll do this again sometime.
That's it for another episode of Get Creative. You can find more information about my guest in the show notes. Be sure to subscribe so that you get the next episode in your sleep, and please give the show a review. For more information about me, go to evanschmidt.com, follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and watch my vlog on YouTube where I share lessons that I've learned. Thank you for listening. Now go get creative.